Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Gunter, class of 2014, and I thank you all for joining us. This work is important and necessary, and your participation makes this work just that much easier and likely to be successful. So, about CBAP. CBAP is an independent alumni group who have coalesced to support the call for and the establishment of a center that institutionalizes the university's commitment to combat and eradicate racism at Princeton and beyond. Our work is strengthened through collaboration with affinity groups, and we work through consensus building to organize around the idea that diverse experiences, views, and skills are indispensable to understand different needs and create sustainable change. And about that center. So our center mission statement is as follows. The mission of the center is to combat and eradicate racism. The center will support cutting-edge applied research that identifies solutions with the goal of disseminating findings to use for the elimination of racism and remediation of its adverse effects. The center will serve as a curated repository of information chronicling internalized, interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism. The center will assemble expertise to diagnose and remediate both past and current manifestations of racism. And the center will serve as a resource for students, academics, governments, for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, as well as the lay public to advance the mission of combating and eradicating racism. The center will seek to fulfill Princeton University's vow to be of service to the nation and to humanity. But on that note, Concerned Black Alumni Princeton is a nonprofit 501c3 organization composed of Princeton alumni of all races and ethnicity concerned with issues of race and discrimination. CBAP opposes hatred, racism, and discrimination in all its forms. And our nonprofit is not affiliated with the Princeton University or endorsed by the university in any way. Now onto our work. So CBAP has 6 broad strategies to engage in our work. The first is to research how the proposed center differs from other centers on anti-racism. You might have heard of the centers at Boston University or American University concerning anti-racism, or the Yale Center for Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. So we would like to know, how are they started? How are they funded? How are they perpetuated? And how do they define words like anti-racism? Knowing these things will help guide the creation of our center. Second is to inventory anti-racist work being done at Princeton already. So there's an incredible amount of faculty already engaging in advocacy in this area. And our goal is to then understand their work and to know their views about the capacity of a center to strengthen their ability to do their work. Third is to develop a database of alumni expertise. So each of us brings valuable skills to the table, whether through our work or our hobbies. Each of us, using our skill sets and other lived experiences, will bring this center to fruition. And that's the reason we can hold events like this one, because of the valuable expertise our panelists are bringing this afternoon. Fourth is to draft a preliminary proposal. And this draft has been completed, but it's a living document and can be found on our website under the heading Our Vision. Please feel free to read and contribute any valuable feedback you might have about our center proposal. Fifth is clarify the role of other centers internal to Princeton. So there's already a number of centers on Princeton's campus, including the Carl Field Center, the Ida B. Wells Justice Data Lab, Pace Center, Keller Center, Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity. So how are they started, funded, perpetuated? These are important questions we have as we develop this center. And finally is meeting with President Eisgruber and other Princeton University administrators. And I think the need of this is self-evident. We need to get their approval. We need their buy-in in order to bring this project to fruition. And we do this through our 7 committees. First is Affinity Group Alliances, whose purpose is to pursue and strengthen ties between CBAP and Princeton University alumni organizations, student groups, staff groups, and others. Center Proposal, whose goal is to produce written materials that articulate the justifications for and purposes to be achieved by the establishment of a center. financial resource development, whose purpose is to develop financial strategies to help the organization realize its goal of the creation of an anti-racism center to be financed by Princeton University. Marketing Communications, whose committee goal is the branding of CBAP and developing an appropriate presence digitally and elsewhere. Recruitment and Engagement, whose committee focuses on identifying Princeton's individual alumni and introducing them to CBAP and encouraging their support and engagement with the labor of CBAP. And Faculty Engagement, which was formed to identify and engage with a network of supportive faculty and administrators from Princeton University and elsewhere who were committed to the establishment of the center. And finally, Events and Programming, whose goal is to assist CBAP in their efforts and programs to broaden awareness of, interest in, and support for the proposal to establish the Center to Combat and Eradicate Racism. And that committee is responsible for events like this one that we're holding today with you all. And if you'd like to engage with us in this work, please visit our website, fill out the form, or send an email to cbap.inquiries@gmail.com. So with that said, today we have a panel discussion we're calling Unblocking the Vote. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Robert Cushney, class of 76, to introduce this event and our speakers. Cush?
Thank you so much, Michael. Did you have something you wanted to interject, Lionel? All righty then. As we approach the 60th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act and we enter this crucial election year, we find it more significant than ever to highlight the importance of protecting and promoting the vote of racial minorities in America. Citizenship and the ability to vote are inextricably intertwined. Without one, the other is impossible to achieve. Today, we will concentrate on the centuries-long affronts to racial minorities' efforts to exercise their right to vote and access to the vote. The 1790 Naturalization Act limited becoming a naturalized citizen to free white men. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was the first to exclude a specific ethnic group. It was then expanded to ban persons from other Asian countries, and until 1952, federal policy barred immigrants of Asian descent from becoming US citizens and having access to the vote. The 1965 Voting Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination in voting, yet and still into the 21st century, the citizenship of Asian Americans is sometimes questioned at the polls. The passage of the 14th Amendment in 1866 guaranteed that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States, with the exception of Native Americans. This exclusion of Native Americans from the 14th Amendment was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1884, and then the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted American citizenship to Native American peoples more broadly. But it wasn't until 1957 that all states had finally passed statutes extending the right to vote to its Native population. Utah was that final state. Even after these wins, discriminatory policies such as poll taxes, literacy tests, and other forms of intimidation and discrimination, primarily aimed at suppressing the votes of Black citizens, also negatively impacted Native voters. The Reconstruction era, the years between 1863 and 1877, saw tremendous gains for Black Americans, including the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which ended slavery, extended citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., and prohibited states from taking away the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, respectively. Those gains, however, were quickly nullified by political violence aimed at establishing the white authority. Although the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 injected new hope into the promise of voting rights finally being upheld, those rights still have to be fought for, as every effort continues to be used to maintain the voter disenfranchisement of non-white Americans. America's long history of efforts to limit the political power of Black Americans and other voters of color is now taking place in an assault on voting rights unlike anything we've seen since the Jim Crow era. Much of this legislative blitz disproportionately targets voters of color, in particular Black voters who played a critical role in winning both the White House and the US Senate for Democrats. Perhaps the biggest recent blow to the struggle for voting rights continues after key provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were struck down in 2013 by the Supreme Court, effectively dismantling pre-clearance protections, the teeth of the Voting Rights Act. Numerous states have since moved to enact laws that restrict access to voting. For a rough comparison, the Brennan Center's tally in early February of 2020 identified 35 restrictive bills in 15 states. Since then, lawmakers in 47 states have introduced more than 360 bills with provisions that restrict voting access. Enactment of such laws have the ability to impact voting rights for Asian Americans, Latin Americans, Native Americans, and African Americans alike. These instances of discrimination towards our communities continue to the present day as the need for civil rights groups to band together to demand voter protections for minorities and communities of color grows. Today, we have three distinguished panelists, and I'll tell you a little about each of them before we bring them on. Actually, we sort of have four distinguished panelists because my co-host, co-moderator, Edgar Rios, will also be interjecting his perspectives as a panelist. Our three panelists today are Hoyt Zia, retired as a senior VP, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for Hawaiian Airlines, Inc. For most of his career, he was an attorney who practiced in San Francisco and Honolulu, both in law firms in-house. He also served as an appointee in the Clinton administration as Chief Counsel for Export Administration, Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. His past community involvement includes Bar Association service as president of the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area, the statewide Asian Pacific Bar of California, and the founding president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, as well as on the boards of numerous community groups. He currently serves on the board of the Consuelo Foundation. The son of refugees from Shanghai, China, Hoyt was born and raised in New Jersey, graduated from Dartmouth College, class of '75, served as a U.S. Marine Corps officer, and then received his law degree from the UCLA School of Law. We also have today Regis Pecos, a citizen of Cochiti Pueblo, of the Cochiti Pueblo. He has served as governor, lieutenant governor, and as tribal councilman of the Cochiti, Regis Pueblo for over 30 years. Pecos made history as the first Native American trustee in the Ivy League when he was appointed a Princeton trusteeship as a Princeton trustee in 1997. For 16 years, he served as the executive director of the New Mexico Office of Indian Affairs, and Pecos Regis was the former chief of staff to the Speaker of the New Mexico House of Representatives and former director of policy and legislative affairs for the office of the Majority Floor Leader. Over 20 years ago, Regis founded and is currently the co-director of the Leadership Institute at Santa Fe Indian School, a think tank for Native youth unique for its culturally sensitive and community-based approaches that consider and transform the impacts of externally developed policy on tribal community institutions. My co-moderator, Edgar Rios, class of '74 at Princeton. He's a licensed attorney in the states of New York, California, Virginia, and in Washington, D.C. as well. He wouldn't give me a lot of his background. I think he's trying to hide from somebody, I don't know. And lastly, in our first panelist is Attorney General of the great state of Nevada, where I have adopted. Attorney General Ford is Nevada's 34th Attorney General, and he took office on January 7th, 2019, making him the first African American to hold statewide constitutional office in Nevada. A former state senator, A.G. Ford previously served as both the majority leader and minority leader in the Nevada state legislature and held leadership roles on several legislative committees. He also spent many years in private practice as a partner at both Snell and Wilmer LLP and Egglet Adams in Las Vegas. Before practicing law, A.G. Ford served as a public school math teacher, shaping hundreds of lives. During his term as a state senator, A.G. Ford led the passage of significant legislation that required police officers to wear body cameras. A.G. Ford was also the impetus for a local district attorney to create a conviction integrity unit to review cases that allege wrongful conviction. A.G. Ford has earned 5 degrees, which include his law degree and PhD in educational administration from the Ohio State University, as well as degrees in interdisciplinary studies, international education, and educational administration. That's a lot of heavy minds on our panel today. And I will start by bringing on Attorney General Ford of the great state of Nevada.
Well, thanks so much, Kush, or Robert. I don't know what maybe I should give you. Oh, okay.
Kush.
Kush is fine. Okay, I don't know. We get in certain environments, and all of a sudden, we can't. I'm just joking. Kush, it's great to see you, buddy. Great to see you. And Edgar, I think it was, who you said you don't have much information on. Edgar, I keep subpoenas in my pocket, man. So be careful.
Okay, I hear you, brother.
It is great to be on the screen, everybody. My name is Aaron Ford. I am the Nevada Attorney General. And I want to thank you for having me here today to discuss, in my view, what's one of the most important topics facing Americans today. And I, again, want to specifically thank Kush for reaching out. I've known Kush only for a few years now, but he has been an avid supporter of me and what we do in the Office of Attorney General. And so thank you for reaching out, Kush. I explained to him when he reached out that I was going to be in between events, and I must apologize at the outset that soon after I finish my comments, I'm going to have to excuse myself after a few questions that I could answer, but I did want to take some time to accommodate Kush's request here and speak with this august group. And before I continue, I also have to pay homage to one of your alums, who's a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, Andrea Campbell, who is a Princeton, I believe, class of 04. I don't know exactly off the top. Someone just sent me a message about her class year, but I can't remember. But I've known Andrea for a handful of years as well now. She is spectacular. She is a fantastic representative of Princeton, what you stand for, what you do, and you would be very proud if you don't know her to know of the work that she's putting in as Attorney General for the great state of Massachusetts. And so I wanted to mention it as well. And she and I have a lot of work that we do together. And I'm sure she would agree with me. I won't speak for her, but I'm sure she would agree with me on a lot of things that I'm going to be saying today. Because, look, for as long as we've been a country, our system has suffered from an existence of marginalized voter groups. Kush took a little bit of my speech in his opening comments, but I think it bears repeating that our democracy has suffered from laws or statutes or limitations that have been specifically designed to keep certain citizens away from the voting process. We are living in the midst of a revival, frankly, a positive opinion about some of these restrictions. Some politicians are so in doubt, I don't have to name them, but some politicians sow doubt in the electoral process, and they attack laws that are designed to keep our democracy free and fair, not to mention secure. And so in my mind, discussions about election reforms can be divided into two sections. I would call it the pre-2020 election and post-2020 election. Because as we're all aware, the 2020 election actually saw an unprecedented attack on democracy as a fundamentally shared value in America. In Nevada, I'm proud to say that we took some steps that are opposite from what some other states have taken to restrict ballot access to the citizens in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And the false narrative that has ensued and continues, frankly, to permeate every aspect of our society these days. In Nevada, lawmakers passed Assembly Bill 321 in the 2021 legislative session. And that made it such that Nevada is now the 6th state, although there may be more now, but it became the 6th state to adopt a permanent vote by mail system, making it easier and more accessible for folks to actually access the voting process. So under this law, every active registered voter in Nevada receives a mail ballot before a primary and before a general election. And we saw how this action made voters' lives easier during the pandemic. So the legislature decided not to take that away, and they actually institutionalized it into our state statutes. And so we expanded access to the ballot in that way, and we saw Nevadans make use of that in 2022. For example, around 192,000 people voted in Washoe County, which is where Reno is, pardon me, during this midterm, which broke the previous raw turnout record for that county in terms of raw turnout, not percentage-wise. But that was principally due, as we understand it, to this new form of permanent opportunity to get access to the polls. Other states, as you know, and as Kush already pointed out, sadly did not do the same. We've seen restrictive voting laws that have been passed around America, and it's going to get worse. Let's be clear about that. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, by January 2nd of 2023, lawmakers around the country, as Kush had introduced or pre-filed 150 restrictive voting laws. And this was in response to the election we saw in 2020. Many of the laws that we saw were based around an ID requirement for voters to cast ballots. And let me take a step back, because look, I know that there is a general consensus out there that what's the big deal about voter ID? You know, you have to have an ID to go buy liquor, or you got to have an ID to get on a plane, and that's all true, and that's fine, and that's standard. I have some lawyers on the screen though, and you know that it's not as simple as that. That's not the analysis. The question is this: it's not can the government make you do it? The question is, what's the reason the government wants you to do it? That's the real question. And they're just like there are certain tests that have to apply. And I didn't make this up. The Supreme Court made this up. The Supreme Court says that when you are talking about what's called a fundamental right, in this instance, voting, it's not as simply as saying what's the rational reason behind requiring a certain restriction. The test is simply is more precise. The test is, what's the compelling reason? That's a key phrase. What's the compelling reason that the government wants to add a new requirement to the exercise of a constitutional right? That's the question. So it's not a question of does it make sense? You know, it's not a comparison of buying beer in a store. It's an actual question that must be asked. What's the compelling reason that the government wants to make you do something extra, right? And most folks say, well, look, voter fraud is a compelling reason. And most folks would say, yeah, that makes sense. Voter fraud is a compelling reason, except that you actually have to prove what you're saying is a problem is an actual problem. That's what the court says. It ain't me making it up. The Supreme Court has said that if you're going to say voter fraud is a reason to put a new requirement before someone can vote, then you got to prove it exists. And so courts across the nation have looked at voter fraud contentions, and they have determined almost unanimously that not a sufficient amount of voter fraud at a high level exists in order to put in place a new requirement before you can vote. And so it makes a question then. It makes you wonder, if voter fraud is not really a sufficient reason, what's the real reason you want somebody to have to get an ID to vote? Well, what's your ulterior motive? Because the courts have said, and not me, courts have said that voter fraud is an insufficient, you're not being able to prove it enough to make it a reason. And so what we've determined and what we've learned is that restrictive voter ID laws like this ultimately end up disproportionately impacting certain people, people of color, veterans, students, certain folks who tend to vote a certain kind of way. And so those who are pushing this voter ID requirement, it has we have learned, and we have pinpointed language in North Carolina where they talk about in the gerrymandering context, for example, that they were precise in targeting Black folks with that particular law. And so we know that in the ID requirements, people are also looking at that. And so, these requirements have been shown to impact Black folks and Latino folks, among others, at a higher and more disproportionate rate. Studies have also shown that people
Attorney A.G. Ford, let me ask you, because I know you have to go. There are many means of suppressing the vote, but are there any that you consider to be the most ominous in terms of how large of an impact they may have?
Look, Kush, I won't prioritize or rank order the disenfranchising attempts that are prevalent out there. They all, in my estimation, are horrendous and impact minority groups at an almost equally oppressive way. I mean, you've heard about Georgia laws where they say you can't pass out water to folks lined up, right? I'm not going to say that's worse than saying that you got to have an ID to vote. I'm not going to say that. What I am going to say is that all of these are aligned for a particular purpose, in my estimation. And right here in my own state of Nevada, you have people who are pushing for a constitutional amendment now to require voter ID. And I've already pushed back and said that, look, it's unconstitutional unless you can demonstrate, again, a compelling reason for requiring this new requirement, right? This new restriction. And so that's part of the conversation. So
what about the attempts that appear to be being set up for after the votes are counted or made, that they can disqualify certain votes after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in 2020. Look, I took an oath of office back in 2019, and that oath said that I would protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Nevada. I did not know that literally meant that I'd be protecting democracy by virtue of the fact that some would be attacking the very essence of what we do, voting, right? So they would first off try to make it hard for you to even register to vote, right? And then they would make it hard for you, even if you've registered, to actually exercise the right to vote. And then they wanted to make it, if you have exercised that right, make it hard to count that vote. And if they'd actually counted the vote, they went a step further and wanted to throw out the vote, right? And these are all, again, tantamount to efforts to take us backwards, right? And to restrict the votes of certain folks. We saw that in Nevada. I saw it at every single one of those levels that I just told you about. The pre-vote, the pre-register, the register, the vote, the kicking out the vote. And we continue to see arguments about that on a going forward basis. And so my office is preparing right now. We actually have a task force that works both internally within my state, but also externally with other states like the Massachusetts AG, for example. We're working on projects that contemplate people attacking the election this go around, and we're going to be prepared for it.
Okay, well, that was one of my questions. If AGs such as yourself are only able to work within their state boundaries, or are there a way that you all can interact with each other to have a more powerful effect?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I hate to make it partisan, but frankly, it is partisan. I don't have, so we have 4 attorney general groups out there. 2 are, well, one is bipartisan, some would argue, and that's called the Attorney General Alliance. One is nonpartisan, which is called the National Association of Attorneys General. Then you got 2 partisan groups, the Democratic Attorney General Association and the Republican AG Association. I am co-chair of the Democratic AGs Association, have been for the last 3 years. My tenure terms out this year. And as DAGA, the Democratic AGs, we work together hand in hand all the time. We have weekly phone calls, we have quarterly meetings, and we are constantly in communication with one another about, frankly, not just what's happening in the voting context, but generally speaking, across a range of issues. I can't say that many of my Republican colleagues and I are able to work together on this issue because, frankly, it's them who are pressing what I consider to be these disenfranchising efforts to undermine the right to vote. So they outnumber us maybe by 2 AGs. It's like 27 to 23, maybe, or 26 to 25, 24 right now. And they work in cahoots with one another to file lawsuits against certain laws in states. And we do the opposite, where we are trying to buttress up and support good practices.
I had a question. It's like, does the Attorney General are they in charge of enforcing voting rights and voting election procedures nationwide? Since it's already been, I guess, addressed in the Supreme Court, what does that mean in terms of like, what does that leave us forward? Do we need a new law, or the Voting Rights Act has been, was it 73 they wanted to get rid of it? I'm trying to understand, like, who's in charge of enforcing voting rights privileges?
Mr. McClendon, that's a great question, and the answer is that it depends. It varies by state. Most states have a chief elections officer. The Secretary of State is that person in my office, for example. He is responsible in this instance. It's a he who's responsible for overseeing the elections, counting the votes, ensuring that the elections are fair, free, and accessible and secure. And I support him. I'm his lawyer. And I was the lawyer for the Republican Attorney General, the Republican Secretary of State, Barbara Sagatsky, in the last election cycle, when she was getting blamed for voter fraud issues, and you can entertain those arguments. And so I work in tandem, as do many other AGs work in tandem with their state elections officer to enforce those laws and to protect those particular rights. But at the federal level, you do have the federal Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney who addresses those. His tools are being taken away. Seems to be daily these days, right? You talk about the Voting Rights Act, and yes, we do need a reinvigoration of those types of acts. We do need not necessarily a new law, but the word I'm looking for, recertification or reenactment, so to speak, of restoring. That's the word I'm looking for of Voting Rights Act.
It's been tenuous for the past 15 years now. The Voting Rights Act, okay?
Yeah,
it wasn't permanent. So
yeah, and so look, the bottom line is this. I think, unfortunately, and I'm sure the crowd I'm talking to right here, the 34 folks, 33 excluding me, don't fit the bill I'm about to describe. But so many of us have gotten complacent. I remember reading and I don't know who said it, but they say every generation must fight for their own rights, right? And these rights got secured in the 60s, and generations since then have taken them for granted and have been complacent. And while some on the other side who never liked these laws implemented in the first place have been constantly whittling away and setting up systems at, for example, the Supreme Court level, such that now they have a 6-3 majority. And it's not just the voting rights that are under attack, right? And at the end of the day, we have to kind of reinvigorate ourselves to elect folks back into office who are going to represent the values of progress and push back against what we've seen these people be successful at in the last 5, 6, 8, 10 years at this point. So that's a soapbox response, I know, but that's how I feel about it. We've had a lot of complacency, and we told people to wake up. We've been shaking folks, wake up. I heard somebody talk about Teddy Pendergrass a little earlier. He had a song, wake up everybody, no more sleeping in bed. You remember that? He said, no more backwards thinking, time for thinking ahead. That's what he said. But there's many folks who don't want you thinking ahead. They want you thinking backwards, right? And they're taking you backwards. Don't take my word for it. Look at the Supreme Court. They took us back 60 years in reproductive rights. You know what I mean? They don't want you awake. That's why they got a war on woke. You understand what I'm saying? That's why they got a war on woke. They don't want you to wake up everybody. They want you to sleep and lulled in complacency. And many folks have fallen asleep and therefore have been lulled in complacency. Listen, don't let me get soapboxing too much in here. Let me take a couple more questions before I got to bounce.
Yes, we have a question from the audience. We have two. The first is, Are you monitoring the bad actors, such as the ones identified in Georgia?
Yes, we actually have litigation ongoing right now. By bad actors, well, I don't know what you mean. Let me qualify my answer.
Yeah.
We have what we call fake electors, people who in our state purported to be the electors duly elected to nominate the president and send our votes to Congress. They were lying. They were fake electors. They said that President Trump won in Nevada, and they signed documents as such, and they sent those documents to Congress and to our Secretary of State and all over the place. I have indicted them for fraud-based allegations, uttering false instruments and forgery. And we are, as many other states, I shouldn't say many other, there was about 6 states or so where this is taking place. And you know, 3 of us, I think, 3 of us, at least 2, have indicted. So yes, we're trying to hold bad actors accountable. I'm not doing the same type of stuff that Fani Willis is doing. You know, we haven't expanded that far from a RICO perspective, but we have our own take on holding folks accountable in these types of circumstances.
And our next question comes from Charles King. What are your predictions concerning democracy in the United States if Trump wins the 2024 presidential election?
Look, he told you what he's going to do. Trump, on the one hand, concerns me greatly because of what we've already seen. He's shown us who he is, and I believe him, right? But I'm also like him in some sense. When I run for office, I tell people the truth. I tell them where I stand on positions. I tell them what I believe, because here's the deal. When I get their cush, I don't want them saying that I bamboozled them. I don't want them saying, oh, look, he got elected. Now all of a sudden he's doing this instead of doing that, right? I've told you from the beginning where I stand on voting rights issues, where I stand on abortion rights issues, where I stand on environmental issues. And so I tell you what I mean and what I think and what I believe and what I say and what I'm going to do, and I mean it. So does he. And he has told you what he's going to do. Dictated on day one. Retribution. He's talked about, you know, camps and mass deportations, right? These are things that he has already said he's going to do, just like he said he was going to do the bad stuff when he came in this last go around, right? And so I have great concerns around democracy in particular, because he's talking about jailing folks who are prosecuting him for breaking the law. That's one of the biggest undermining opportunities for democracy that we have here. And so, you know, again, it's a longer answer than was necessary. I have great concerns about democracy in the United States if Trump is reelected in 2024.
Next.
Another question here. Wouldn't the John Lewis Voting Rights Act restore the protections of the sick? Yes, it would indeed. And that's part of what has been an effort underway since since this particular election cycle. But again, it goes back to what I said a minute ago. We have to vote folks into office who are going to actually get it done. In the Senate, they can't do anything without 60 votes because they got a filibuster rule, right? And right now they got 51 senators, or maybe I forget. Are they tied right now? And the VP is breaking the tie. I don't really remember anymore. I mean, the fact is they can't get anything done over there, and they're certainly not going to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act done, because you got more than half, you got about half the country who are pushing back against voting rights. But yes, the short answer was yes. And then the last question I see is, what can the average citizen do about this? I think I've said it 3 or 4 times already. You probably know what I'm going to say. Vote. Vote. You got to vote, right? They're making it more difficult, to be sure, but you still got to stand up and you still got to vote. And you have to ensure that you are taking people with you to the polls, that you are explaining issues to them and the import of what's going on and the defense of democracy that we're all under need to be engaged in at this point. Now, that's one thing you can do is to vote, but also again, continue to talk, educate yourself and talk among your friends about what's going on out there. Because frankly, we got 35 people on this screen. You know, everybody ain't like y'all. Everybody's not reading the newspaper. Everybody's not keeping up with political events right now. They are worried about kitchen table issues like, how much is my rent going to be, right? Yeah. Why is my utility rate going up so much? Why is gas so expensive? That's what they're focused on. They are now focused on the esoteric conversations around the fundamentals of democracy. They're not worried about that. And so it's important that we continue to talk to our friends who are not talking about this and to impress upon them the importance of what's going on, to continue to spread that word and then convince them to get engaged and get involved. So look, I can take one more question and I got to bounce, but thank you so much. Any other questions here?
Thank you so much, A.G. Ford.
How would an applied research racism center help you defend democracy? Listen, I heard Michael describe what your organization does, and it resonated with me. These are important topics and conversations. The center, as you guys are contemplating it, I think would add to the dialogue and to the discourse. But beyond that, it could help to provide us solutions to the issues, right? You asked me, what can the average citizen do about this? I would like to be told from the center, here's what we suggest you do about this, right? And that is an iterative process, to be sure. It is not a one suit fits all, because the states are different. But I think a racism center focusing on this type of issue, plus others, to be sure, could be very helpful in that discussion from a highlighting perspective, but also from a solutions perspective. So, Kush, thanks again for having me. I'm sorry that I rambled on longer even than I should have.
You were perfect. You did exactly what we needed. Raised some questions, covered some things that I had notes on, and obviously other people had questions about. And we really appreciate your time. And I hope that's a nice, luxurious hotel you're in.
It ain't luxury, brother. I can tell you right now. I appreciate you. All right. Hey, everybody, y'all take care.
Right.
Great to see you all. Have a great rest of your meeting.
We appreciate your brilliance also. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Next up, we have our very own alum of class 74, Edgar Rios,
Yes.
who will bring in our next guest and or make his commentary as he is our representative for the Latinx community.
Right. I think at this point, Kush, I'm gonna go ahead and give Hoyt Zia and Regis Pagos an opportunity to make their comments. You've heard about Hoyt. On top of everything that Kush indicated about his background, Hoyt is also a co-founder of a new group called Asian Americans for Democracy, which apparently is aimed at getting the Asian American vote out in the swing states. Hoyt, if you could speak generally about what, if any, have been the historical and current day challenges and obstacles to mobilizing and getting out the Asian American vote in the United States, or whatever other aspect of Asian American voting that you would like to share with us, please do so.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Edgar. And let me start by just thanking the concerned Black alumni of Princeton for letting me serve on this panel, especially since I'm not a Princeton alum, although I do have many connections to Princeton, including a sister who was actually, I'm sitting in for her, my sister Helen, class of 74, or 73, I forget which class she ended up graduating with, and a brother who graduated in 76 with a couple of folks from here, I think. I would also like to preface my comments by saying something that the Japanese expression that we use a lot here in Hawaii called Okaga Sama Day, which means basically it's appreciation. We stand on your shoulders, and by your shoulders, I'm talking about our Black, Latinx, Native American brothers and sisters who have fought the good fight and paved the way for the rights that all people of color enjoy. So I just wanted to make note of that. Lastly, real quick, I don't know if she's on here, but I had a high school classmate and friend named Jerry Tolan, who was class of 75. I haven't seen her since graduating, but tried to keep track of her, and I just hope she's doing well. And I hope she's a member of this organization.
I'm here, Hoyt.
There you
Hello.
go.
Jerry, okay. Hey,
Hi.
good to see you.
Nice to see you
Yeah,
too.
well, we'll catch up another time, but a lot of our old friends, you know, I'm still in touch with from high school. But anyway, I'm so glad to see you again after all these years. You know, the other thing that I want to comment on is looking at all the faces here and seeing how old we all are. It's amazing to me, something I reflect on now a lot, that we have seen a lot of history go down, right? I mean, we were alive when the Civil Rights Act was in full swing, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, and a lot of other things, and just how shameful it is. Here we are sitting discussing whether it's been one step forward, two steps back, or two steps forward and one step back. But clearly, we have been going backwards. Actually, if I can add a couple of anecdotes about just to establish just my connection with this group, even though I didn't go to Princeton. I always feel very proud that I was in Washington when the March on Washington took place back in 1963. Now, I got to admit, I wasn't there for the march. We just happened with my sister Helen and I, with our father, happened to be passing through Washington that day. But I was struck by just how many Black folks I saw out there carrying signs, you know, coming from New Jersey. It was really an unusual thing. But I always remembered that, even though, again, at the time, I didn't understand what the hell was going on. You know, another thing I reflect upon, because, you know, voting is so important. Our year, 1971, when we turned 18, those of you from the class of 75, was the year that the 26th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So we got to be the first ones, 18-year-olds, to, you know, vote in a national election. And as we talk about people voting and how things have changed, is something that always stuck in my mind. That and this one other story I remember from elementary school, reading about civil rights and voting rights in the South. And just real quickly, that story was about how Black man goes to register to vote. He takes and there are a whole series of obstacles from letting him vote. Everything from, you know, checking his records, paying poll tax, and you know, history, civics exam, everything. And he passes with flying colors till the last test, which is when they show him a magazine in Chinese or a newspaper in Chinese and say, now read this and you can get the vote. And he looks at it for a while and then he says, well, you know, I can't make out really the little text, but I can see the head. I can tell you what the headlines say. And they say, one less Black man is going to be able to vote in Mississippi today. So all these things, you know, I think about, and when I think about how important the right to vote is and how important this discussion is. So again, thank you for letting me be part of this. I think as a general matter, you know, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, it's a very long title now. I'm just going to say Asians for short, and I hope they'll understand who I'm referring to. You know, it's interesting to me that the struggle has been the same. A lot of the voting, the suppression activities that are going now obviously affect all of us. And because of the Civil Rights Act, you don't find any that specifically say, oh, this is to keep Black people from voting, to keep the Latino people from voting or Asians voting. But obviously they have the same effect and they apply to us as well, as Asian Americans. Of course, historically, as Kush mentioned already, you know, the restrictions against Asians from voting go back from the time that the Asians first started coming here. And that is one through immigration and denying Asian Americans the right to become Americans. So it wasn't that they said you can't vote, or that you aren't, you know, as you're Native American or Black, you aren't allowed to vote. It was you're not allowed to be citizens, and that effectively, obviously, for decades, kept us from having the right or the ability to vote. And this is again why I was trying to say we stand on your shoulders. You know, the Civil Rights Act, the marches on Washington, and all the terrible things that were done as African Americans fought to get the vote and the Civil Rights Act passed, we have benefited from. So so we get to vote because of everything that everybody else has done. Are there things that specifically or impact Asian Americans more than others? Well, I suspect that probably goes into the area of access to foreign language materials. So Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, back in '75, basically said mandated that foreign ballots and voting materials be made available in foreign languages, so that immigrant people whose first language is not English would have access to and be able to knowledgeably vote. That hasn't changed. I was looking at that in particular to see if there's anything that affected that, and I think that becomes less an issue of a tool for those who want to keep immigrants and particularly Asian Americans from voting, so much as it's it's probably more of a budgetary issue throughout the country, and who will pay for the creating all these different language materials for people. The other thing I would note too, that it is also interesting, and I guess it's not so much within immigration, but so Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, there is a whole block of people in Hawaii, people in Hawaii, which is a majority Asian state, got the vote in 1959 when Hawaii became a state. That's great. But if you go further west, into Guam, to the Northern Commonwealth and Northern Mariana Islands, which includes Saipan and American Samoa, it's different. Those folks, although they are in American territories and either are considered American citizens or American nationals, which I don't quite understand what that means, are not allowed to vote. They are allowed to elect a delegate to Congress who is supposed to speak on their behalf, but they don't get to vote. And in some cases, like I think in Samoa, if an American Samoan moves to a state on the mainland or to Hawaii, where voting is allowed, they have to pass a citizenship test before they're allowed to vote. Where some of the others do get to vote once they come to one of these states, but out in the territories where they are, they're effectively unable to vote. So that has obviously an impact on the ability of Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians who are considered American citizens or at least American nationals from the ability to vote. And because it's so remote, you don't hear much about it. And because the population is so small, and their representation in Congress, where laws may be, could be made to change that, they don't have much of a voice, so you don't hear much about that. But that is one of the issues for voting for Asian Americans. So otherwise, I'm going to keep my comments short, just at this point. And suffice it to say that for Asian Americans, we suffer all the things that Attorney General Ford was talking about in terms of suppression, voter ID. We have, and language does factor into this too, because many of the people who are, especially older and actually newer voters too, there's been a lot of immigration. The growth of Asian American voters in the last 10 years has almost doubled. It's the largest growing minority population. I can talk more if there's interest in what being an Asian American, what Asian American votes consist of and where they are. But my point is that, especially for, let's say, voter ID, where immigrants don't have access to, because for a lot of reasons, just like a lot of people of color, access to the ability to take up time off to work to get an ID, or they're old and language doesn't, as senior citizens, they don't have access or ability to go places where they get that. The laws that restrict people from having, like in Arizona, having someone other than a direct family member take their ballot to a drop box. All these things affect Asian Americans too. We have an aging population as well. The last thing, since Edgar was kind enough to mention it, was the effort that I'm involved in right now is started when I started thinking earlier on, and this is very partisan, though, and I hope you folks don't mind, that I would wake up, a year from now and find out that Trump is back in the White House. And worse than that, I was thinking I would not only would that be bad, I dread that thought, but I would be kicking myself if I hadn't done as much as I can to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, one of the things that I think we, as a child of immigrants, we really feel strongly about is we are glad to be Americans, we're glad to be in this country, and we enjoy the rights that we've been told that we should have. So to have someone who come in and we know is going to destroy our democracy is just not something that we can that anyone should tolerate. So the Asian Americans for Democracy, in a nutshell, is basically at our age, one of the things we have done is, from being active in the Asian American community nationally, is to have networks, and we know people who are like us, probably retired empty nesters, maybe have election money, and who share the dread that Trump could be back in the White House. So we formed this group to raise money among those networks, money that we're not going to give to any candidates. What we're going to do instead is in the battleground states where we know that the races will be very close, and 1 or 2% of the vote could change it from being, a victory to a catastrophe, and that the Asian American votes in a lot of these swing states can do that. So we will be we're raising money to fund the 501c4s, Asian groups, grassroots organizations in battleground states that are out there getting the Asian vote out, with the hope that would be the most effective way to get Asians there and to make a difference in the election, as well as to raise the profile of Asian Americans in the national political scene and create more empowerment. And with that, I will step back. If anybody has questions, I will be glad to try to answer.
Thank you, Hoyt. Appreciate your comments. Is there any information available out there that breaks down sort of how the Asian American electorate ends up breaking down in elections? Or
absolutely, Edgar. There's a lot of data that exists, and particularly starting from, let's say, the last 10 years and from 2020. That's another thing about voter suppression, why it doesn't affect us, or we're not as targeted as much, because largest Asian populations are probably in 5 areas around the country, not, in New York, California, Hawaii, and so on. So, and states that generally are blue. So voter rights are being expanded there, not suppressed. One of the things that we have, and then there's a question about really who are Asian Americans? Is it a monolith? And depends on who you have talked to and the context of the conversation. You might come up with other, you'll come up with different views on it. In terms of voting, one of the facts that comes out is that in 2020, it's interesting that the Asian American vote was about 72% voted for Democrats, for Biden, and only 28% were red and voted for Trump. So you can take any data, any breakdown of numbers that you want, how many Asians there are in various states, so on and so forth, and where they voted. But so the short answer to your question is that yes, there is information. And to me,
does the breakdown go further deeper into the Asian American community, such as Indian Americans, Filipinos? Because they're all considered in that same category. And I'm just wondering, have there been studies about how the voting patterns in those subgroups have manifested in our last? Yeah.
The answer is yes. And obviously a lot more can be done and will be done in the future as to do. But yes, there have been breakdowns among the various subgroups, ethnicities within the Asian American, considered in the Asian American category.
I'm going to open it up to questions from our audience for Hoyt concerning any aspect of his presentation.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
What are the key states that will make a big difference? We're talking about electoral college influence on the final result. What are the most important states in America right now? Because I looked at the map last time. Was it 2020? Okay, last election. It appeared that most of the electoral was like a red state. Okay, how do we influence those states that are I would say pro-Trump right now? So how do we get around that? Because and luckily these states don't have a majority of electoral votes, but they do add up. So how do we influence that?
Well, I think so. The focus for us is on the battleground states, which by definition means they can go either way. Some are mostly blue, but could change. Like Pennsylvania could easily go red because there's so many Republicans in the state. North Carolina. I mean, there's 7 swing states.
Pennsylvania almost made a difference last time. Go ahead, though.
Sure did. Georgia, Warnock, Ossoff, they were elected by the skin of their teeth then, and a lot of that was because of the Asian American vote. But so anyway, the short answer to your question is so I think Pennsylvania, Nevada, which is from A.G. Ford state, is an important state, and there's a significant number of Asian Americans there, and particularly the Filipino community. New York, New York is a swing state. Michigan, which is somewhat problematic now, which everybody knows why, because of the Israel-Gaza Palestinian conflict has changed in the.
Oh yeah, Michigan, big time. Yeah, right.
Wisconsin, Georgia, although that's becoming a little bit more problematic right now. But those are probably the key swing states that we would be focusing on, devoting our money to.
So there's no hope in the red state, I guess.
No, I don't think so. I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that. So I think Texas as being red, right? Except that there's a growing progressive movement there. There's more Asian Americans there too. And I think we certainly will want to support the activities of grassroots organizations there, with a hope and expectation that at some point in the future, even Texas can go blue. But other than that, no, I think there's really little hope in many of these red states of doing anything, and we know why. There's just no reason there. Thanks for your question. I hope I was able to respond to it.
Yeah. Michael, do we have any other questions from the audience?
We do, from Peter Matlin. In light of the shared concerns over voting rights, are there any institutionalized partnership that brings together Asian Americans with Black and Latino groups working on these issues?
There are, and I think in different states and even nationally, there are groups that are working together, though I don't think you hear much, about them. And I think there are other issues, actually, like here in California, where I am right now. There are Asian Americans working on the reparations issue to support, the passage of reparations for African Americans. So on a variety of issues, and historically, Asians and African Americans have worked very closely, sort of going back to Jesse Jackson's campaign 40 years ago. In fact, one of my co-conspirators on Asian American democracy was his campaign chair, a Chinese American, way back when. So there are organizations that are working together, talking together. None come to mind, but that I could name, but I know they're there. But I can also say that, again, one of the pleasures of talking to you guys is that we I think, contrary to what some people may say, the Asian American community is fully behind, our fellow minority groups and people of color.
Thank you. Hey, Hoyt, you mentioned in the beginning of at some point in your presentation the status of these other, I guess there would be unincorporated territories like Guam and American Samoa, I think the Marianas, and it triggered in me the fact that these unincorporated territories are in sync with with Puerto Rico, which is an unincorporated territory as well,
Right.
and
Yeah, that's so.
and has 3 million people, right, living on the island that are not able to participate in presidential elections or have any representation in Congress. And there, of course, they talk about a pathway to change that being statehood, which it's always a lot of talk but no action. But with respect to these other Asian, unincorporated territories, is there any legally any effort to change that dynamic in terms of their inability to participate in presidential elections or have representation in Congress?
They do have, some of them have representation in Congress, so they're allowed to elect a delegate who actually can't vote.
Right.
On preliminary matters. As far as any widespread action to change that, frankly, I don't know. You don't hear about it. I mean, the funny thing, Edgar, is you mentioned Puerto Rico too. There's a reason why this doesn't happen, right? Because guess what? I suspect that some people think that Puerto Rico might be blue.
Right. Exactly.
It's all this voter suppression crap, right? It's about making sure that the powers that be, who happen to be probably white male, mostly, keep power. And they don't want to open door at all. And because we don't, the Puerto Ricans and the Pacific Islanders, are small in number, they don't have the voice or the money to do the lobbying you would think that would be necessary, like some of the other folks. Anyway.
Just the very fact that they came up with this designation of unincorporated territory to I mean, basically, pushed off people of color, right?
Yeah, you're Americans, but not quite enough Americans to go out to vote. We can't.
I hope that Manuel Del Valle would make a comment now. Manuel, are you still there? He's there. There you go.
Okay. So, Michael, do we have any other questions? Or are we good?
There are no other questions in the queue, but please continue to leave your questions or raise your hand if you'd like to ask anything.
Good. I'm going to mute and enjoy listening to what everybody else has to say.
Okay.
And Regis in particular.
That's very nice.
Okay, so we're gonna move to Regis Pecos, who's been patiently waiting to speak. Regis, thank you for being here with us. Regis is a member of the class of '76, right, Regis? Although I remember when Regis came on campus, I guess it must have been in '72. We had the summer program in effect, and Lionel and I were counselors, I think, and Regis was one of our counselees, and so it's great to reconnect with you, Regis, and to have you here to speak on these issues that I know are dear to your heart. Can you just speak to us generally about the suppression or marginalization in the U.S. of the Native American vote, past, present, and future, my man? You take it from there. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Edgar. Asimio hatma ko sawa you me track where ho Asian me mani gashtiwano yotuna eight shawanil awit mani han cartridge to all of you, the way that our elders teach us to honor those we engage in is to use the precious gift of language with which to communicate. And so I honor all of you and express my deepest gratitude for this dialogue that is about our answering what we want most future generations to inherit from us. And so I appreciate the backdrop with Attorney General's forth articulation and delineation of the many challenges presently. But I also appreciate very much, Mr. Zia, the way in which you have brought these challenges into the kind of personal, if I can frame it that way, response to the challenges. And of course, at one point in our history, there were over 100 million indigenous peoples in what is now the United States. And today we represent just a little over 3 million, that is about 2.5% of the total population. At one point, there were over 800 indigenous languages. And today I'm blessed that among the surviving languages is where I was born and raised. Among the 50 remaining languages in the nation, a very significant number here in my home state of New Mexico. And I share the beginning of our time together, not to belabor all of the really critical elements of the challenges that bring us together this afternoon and hopefully sustain throughout our future. But for us as indigenous peoples, we've been excluded from the very beginning, excluded from the Constitution, excluded as Kush, shared in the 13th and 14th Amendments. One, our gift of the Creator that society, mainstream society, defines as religion, was outlawed and banished, prohibited in the 1880s and not restored. I was blessed to be a co-chair of a national movement that restored the American Indian religious freedom for the first time in the late 70s. I chaired the group in the late 90s for the restoration after 2 US Supreme Court decisions in Lynn versus the United States and in Smith versus the United States, both US Supreme Court cases that basically fundamentally one denied us the right in the free exercise of our religion that predated the United States of America's coming into being. And so of critical importance to us, even as we were provided with citizenship in 1924, but suffrage did not end until 1948 and not into the late 50s that the last state in the Union is shared with you at the front end of this introduction of the panel, that the last state, one, conceded to give Native Americans the right to vote in Utah. What is especially critical for us is that as indigenous peoples here in the United States, we have dual citizenship. We are citizens first of our sovereign indigenous nations that predate the United States. And we, of course, are citizens of our respective states and citizens of the United States. We have a very not racial or ethnic definition, but a political and legal status as citizens of our sovereign nations, as one of those citizenships that we carry as citizens of the United States, as well as citizens of our sovereign nations. And of course, that is very much and fundamentally tied in our relationship and connection to our reservations throughout the United States. The heaviest populations, to provide you some context, of indigenous populations in this country are in Alaska with about 21%, in Oklahoma with about 16%, here in New Mexico just under 13%, South Dakota about 11%, Montana about 9%, and North Dakota about 7%. So a very significant population is in the Midwest and the Southwest of the United States. And although we are small in our population, what I really appreciated Mr. Zia's articulation is that our work is really targeted and concentrated in these key states and elections in these key states that really make a difference in having an impact with the kind of consolidated voting blocks in these states that really create for the narrow margins of elections of members to the House and in the Senate. But I want to share with you what has been happening on a much broader scale nationally since 2018, when the Native American Voting Rights Coalition was organized, that resulted in hearings across the nation to really identify many of what has already been alluded to with regard to the challenges that gave rise to the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And in the aftermath of that defeat, what it then forced us to do in organizing and creating, after 2021, when President Biden issued an executive order that resulted in furthering these national hearings to, one, focus and identify major challenges with regard to full participation in this process. I'll send you the link, but there is a very exhaustive report called Obstacles at Every Turn: Barriers to Political Participation of Native American Voters. And it delineates what later became a mere kind of added complement and framework, but very specific to Native American voting rights, as an act with an overlay of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that has never, one, moved in ways that would result, as we all have been working in however way we are blessed to contribute in seeing the reality of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And hopefully the coattail of that effort can result in the enactment of the Native American Voting Rights Act sometime in the future. But having said that and provided that context, one of the things that we have been doing here in New Mexico is really to create for a very intentional, one, bringing together of Native, of Hispanic, Latinx, and the Pacific Asian Islander population and the Black community, all that are small but make up for the majority that results in a minority majority state here in New Mexico. And so one of the outcomes of this kind of cross-cultural effort of creating alliances and coalitions has resulted, while Congress have failed in passing the Native American Voting Rights Act, is that we've been blessed with the passage of the New Mexico Native American Voting Rights Act that mirrors the John Lewis framework, as well as the Native American Voting Rights Act at the national level. And so many good things are happening as we are taking the benefits of the outcomes of the intentionality of building alliances here in New Mexico. So I just want to very briefly, in the time that we have left, to just provide context to what is happening. But the concern of indigenous peoples here in this country, if Trump were to win, the elders say that would be the end of us, because of the dismantling that largely the US Supreme Court has already been engaged in dismantling the entire legal framework that has been built over the last several hundred years of this nation, that is defined as federal Indian law, that defines citizenship, that defines the legal status of indigenous citizens in this nation, that defines the powers and authorities of sovereign nations across the United States, that defines religious freedom, among all of the other fundamental elements of rights that come with being a citizen, in our case, having dual citizenship that carries many unique elements in our existence. And so there is grave concern with regard to what can happen. And I think, as a question was raised earlier in the chat about how can such an institute at Princeton be a valuable part of contributing, one, to the kind of ongoing necessary discourse that results in bringing many minds together. And of course, there are many, many levels of engagement of people that we represent in our communities, in our states, and across this country. And so those that are blessed with an incredible lived experience of nurturing and nourishing the mind and the intellect that has really transformed into incredible contributions to the academic world, to scholarship, but more so the blessed opportunity to be articulate what many people in our communities, one, will share with us their inability to articulate, as many of you have been blessed in your lives. And so we have a very tremendous and awesome responsibility to use the mind's nurture at these levels to take the kind of challenges that exist for our people in our communities, in our families, to articulate those issues and challenges and barriers, to break down those barriers, to do our part in this time as those who have gone before us contributed in their time with great sacrifice, defining all that we have inherited, blessed as we are. Now the question for us is, what will future generations inherit from us? That I think drives the very need for the maintenance and elevation and the broadening of this very discourse that we're engaged in our efforts here today, to mobilize at multiple levels what is necessary to make sure that we push back and expand and enhance the opportunities that is such a fundamental right to our existence as people of color. Much of what this discussion is about is our shared journey of dehumanization of generations of our people, the ancestors that we come after. So what we do today will define what future generations will inherit from us. And as Indigenous peoples, we are doing what's necessary to make sure that language survives, that culture survives, that our relationship to our lands survive, and that the powers and authorities of the oldest sovereigns that predates the United States survive, so that we are able to live in a world as we define and as we one cherish, to have all of the elements that ancestors who've gone before us sacrificed so much to define in all that we've inherited. So I'll stop there, just to provide context for our contributions and our desire to continue to be part of this discourse. But I want to thank all of you, one, for including the Indigenous peoples in this very important discussion that affects so many of us across this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Regis, for those comments.
Thank you, Regis.
Oh, wow.
Regis? Okay.
He dropped the mic.
Who dropped the mic?
He did, I think
Okay.
Regis did.
Okay, but you can hear me, I gather.
Yeah. I don't know. Go ahead, though.
Regis, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. In doing some research for this forum, I came across a few instances that occurred back in the 2020 election involving Indian tribes. One of them was the Pascua Yaqui tribe in Arizona, where apparently the Arizona had closed the only in-person early voting site on the reservation. And of course, you know, this took away the whole issue of early voting for that tribe. There was another instance in North Dakota where polling place closures they claimed disproportionately affected Native Americans. North Dakota closed 58% of its voting places due to COVID-19 and a shift to vote by mail, forcing some Native American voters to travel up to 50 miles to vote. And I was wondering if that was prevalent, not only there in these instances that I mentioned, but in other parts of the country, involving Native American reservations and tribes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Edgar. Most of the reservations across the United States are rural, as much as communities in other parts of the South, as an example, are rural in nature. So it's not unusual that people have to drive an hour or beyond to a polling place. It's not unusual that the challenges and barriers that are created when you don't have a physical mailing address becomes fundamentally a major barrier. It's not unusual that many elder Native people throughout these many states who need assistance with language becomes a major barrier. It's not unusual that absentee ballots are not really anything that is readily available. So when our communities exist in largely rural states across the nation, those are added levels, one that create for many who don't understand or realize just how challenging it is for a person to cast a vote in these rural reservations. So the examples that you use are really not unusual, but unfortunately, those are the kinds of accommodations that in the Native American Voting Rights Act, we were very acutely cognizant of. One, to build into legislation all of those accommodations that we hope will become a model in states where we have some of the highest Native American populations in this country.
Do you see that as being a major issue in this coming election? This issue of access to the voting, early voting, or access to the polls?
You know, that's unfortunately the reality that's not going to change. So how we accommodate these realities of these circumstances, which means that, and this is clearly partisan, one of the things that we have to do is to hold the Democratic Party at the national level, at the state levels, to invest the kinds of money, one, to create the opportunities to enhance the numbers that otherwise, when Native people are unable to vote, they have to appreciate that really it impacts the larger party politics at multiple levels, And in races so close, it's something that they cannot afford, but it is something that we have to really work hard to impress upon, just as it happened in the last election, where the multi-million dollars that the party raised, unfortunately, went to about 90% of contractors who were people not of color, who were going to be vested and relegated with the responsibility for voter outreach and awareness and education. That kind of money should be invested in our people across the country at multiple levels to do the kind of outreach that otherwise does not happen. And it falls, unfortunately, on many people with very limited resources. So the investment of resources at these levels to fully maximize the outcome is critically important, to have these votes that really can make a difference when you have the kind of concentrated volumes in key states in the Midwest and West.
Michael, do we have any questions for Regis?
Yes, but before I ask, first one, two things I want to note. Just one, that CBAP is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization. The views expressed are the speakers and not of CBAP. That's the lawyerly portions coming to the fore. And I just want to encourage everyone to take a look at the meeting chat, because Manuel del Valle has been very prolific in posting in the chat during the course of this meeting. And I did post the report that Regis referenced, Obstacles at Every Turn. You can find that in the chat as well. But the question comes from Fred DeShiel, and it is, how would an academic applied research racism center help you to defend the framework of rights of the indigenous peoples that are under threat of dismantling?
I think the absence of indigenous scholars in places like Princeton only adds to the divide. And so I think it becomes incumbent upon an institute to be able to, one, do the kind of outreach to bring visiting scholars to provide for the kind of opportunity that for most of us, of our generation, previous generations today, part of the divide in our understanding across all races in this country is really the result of what education has denied all of us. And the whitening divide is a result of what is not a shared part of our collective history. So to be able to bring scholars from indigenous nations from across the country into these spaces can provide for a much deeper understanding about the history and the way in which we have to dismantle what others have shared about a history that is not the real history of our collective history. And so I find that opportunity through an institute in bringing many minds together can only deepen and broaden our understanding of our collective and shared history.
Excellent.
And I had an additional question from the audience asking Mr. Zia the same question regarding how an academic applied research center would help defend the framework of rights for Asian peoples that are under threat of dismantling.
Yeah, I have, all I could do is repeat what Attorney General Ford and Regis just said. I mean, obviously any research, any information that helps move things forward is useful. And, there are centers where research is being done, So it's a matter of disseminating and giving the view, but anything in this way will help. I don't have anything more, anything new really to add to that.
Okay. Michael, is that it?
That is all I
All
have in the
right.
queue, unless anyone, feel free to raise your hand and take yourself on mute off of mute and ask your question.
I say
Yes.
that's not it. What's the next step? So
And
that
then
is not
Lionel
it.
also have a
What's that?
Okay, good question, Elliot. My job in this committee presentation was to address, to bring conclusion. Folks, we have been at this for 4 years now. At the point that George Floyd was publicly executed, many of us got together and began to work towards establishing the center. But it wasn't until the faculty at Princeton, students, graduate students, and even the president of the college had stepped forward. And I call it, express an excited utterance, stating that the kind of injustice that he had observed calls for the university to work to eradicate racism, not only at Princeton, but beyond. And so a number of concerned Black alumni gathered together, concerned Latinx alumni, Asian alumni, white alumni, Native American alumni, and begin to articulate as to what does it mean to fight to eradicate racism. And we understood that it was not just a pronouncement, but that it had to be work. And so that's why we decided to launch the call for a center to combat and eradicate racism, where scholars can do research and offer policy analysis that could be implemented across the board. We have mass incarceration, we have voting challenges, we have educational challenges, health challenges, but nothing has been systematic coming out of the Princeton University, although we have a number of scholars who have established some centers. There are centers on eviction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we think that, the library is full of great analyses, great research, great books, but we need to try to turn some of these things into policy proposals to fight racism and to eradicate it and to move forward the whole nation and really the whole world in trying to get the work activated. And so that's why we come together on a Sunday like today to say, look, these pressing issues need not just be addressed only at a Sunday session, but at through the work of a center to advance the research, the analysis, the proposals. And we think that such a center would benefit the university because there's plenty of interest, plenty of funds that could come available to the university to pursue such research. We think faculty will be able to do relevant work in many fields and try to link the analysis, the theory to practice and back to theory and practice, and so they could feed each other. And we think that the students themselves would benefit from engaging in the study and engaging in participation of relevant work to try to change their objective reality. Not only graduate students in terms of research, but undergrad students who could do some work at Princeton and beyond, at Princeton community, and try to move forward this whole process. So we into 4 years worth of work. The university itself has said that's a good idea. However, you need to identify a faculty champion because administration, on the one hand, after expressing their excited utterance, has stepped back, as opposed to Cornell University, where the administration itself has called for the establishment of a similar center. So we still at the push, we're still doing work. And so that is why we are here today, to try to move forward the process. So we want to invite each of you to join the work. You could put in the chat, I'm interested in the work. You know, we could figure out where you fit in terms of committee work. But beyond the formal presentations of Hoyt Zia, Regis Pecos, and Attorney General Ford, we want to continue the discussion. Fred has this thing that he runs called a meeting after the meeting, the MAM. So many of you may not have had a chance to, right, Regis applauded. It's the meeting after the meeting, where he pulled us into a more intimate engagement to try to talk about what we can do. It's not about whether or not you retired and you have a bunch of time in your hands. It's about the necessity of survival, as we just talked about. The survival of folks and the continued survival of this nation is tied to what we do to resist. And I often say we're not in 1690 anymore. It's because people struggled. We're not at the point of the internment camps because people struggled. We're not, and Regis, you probably will debate that, but you know, we're not in 1492, where it was whole-scale slaughter. Some of that had gone on, and there's a lot of destruction that has taken place. But it's because of struggle that we are where we are today. And as Hoyt pointed out, and I'm just going to conclude and pass it on to Fred, you know, Hoyt indicated that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of those who have struggled before us. That's what it is. And it ain't nothing else but that. And it is really consistent with what Frederick Douglass said: if there's no struggle, there can be no progress, right? Those, who favor freedom without, you know, agitation. I mean, you want, you know, the crops without rain and thunder and lightning and the rest of that. You've got to fight. And so that's where we are at CBAP. And I think that we could all applaud all the great work that Kush, Edgar, Hoyt, Regis, and A.G. Ford has done, and Michael. And we want some discussions from you guys, some engagement to try to move the process forward.
And I would like to say we're not afraid to die. So,
all right, but so Fred, I know you want to invite people. As Kush, we basically at the end of the presentations, and it's, you know, I think it was excellent. But now,
well, you did not, of course, include yourself in that list of people who worked on this, and particularly you work hard on throughout the year and on many more presentations.
Yeah, we have a great committee, and committee of Aria, Cora, and a number of people, and we have CBAP, working group of many folks who are doing this work under the leadership of Michael and Yanni and, you know, Jackson, Lewis, and a number of folks, Trudy. So, but Fred, just want to transition.
Lionel, before you transition to Fred for meeting after the meeting, can I put in a plug for our fundraising efforts?
Go ahead.
Please do, please.
So we hope that many of you, in addition to volunteering, will consider making a donation to CBAP. You can find our donate button on our website at cbapinfo.com. And if you're interested in contributing to our $1 Million Opportunity Fund, which will support the faculty in their initial arrangements for the center, please reach out to me at treasury@cbapinfo.com.
Thank you, David. And Lionel, I was going to say that you cannot have a meeting after the meeting until the meeting has been formally closed.
What does that mean? Go ahead, though.
That means that
Despite my
Michael-
name being Robert, I don't know Robert's rules as well as I perhaps should have.
we follow Michael's rules.
Okay.
Michael's rules of order. Okay.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, well then,
It's still the
I'd like
same
to
same
again
initials. So. Go ahead, Michael.
That's true. I'd like to thank Regis Pecos, Hoyt Zia, and Attorney General Ford for joining us today to talk about this topic. Their sharings don't just elevate the conversation, they provide a plan of action and tell us about new frontiers on which we can battle and win. And with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, asking your questions, participating, active listening. And with that, have a great Sunday evening. Good night.